How's it going, friends? Reckless Yuki here. Hopefully doing fantastic. And in this video, what I want to do is talk about gaming peripherals, which peripherals you should consider spend your hard-earned cash on to improve your gaming performance. And when it comes to gaming, I feel that there is a certain level of pay to win. Depending on what type of peripherals you choose to play on, they could hinder your performance to prevent you from reaching your maximum potential, no matter what skill level you're at. And this video is going to be broken down into 4 categories. It's going to be your display, internet, controller, and audio, because those are the 4 categories I feel are pertinent to this video. And basically in that order as far as where I would class them to basically what you should focus on first to last to try to optimize your gaming gear and what you choose to game on. So instead of paying a lot of money on a fancy controller, you really need to kind of focus on your display as well as your internet before spending that money on that scuff. And in this video, I'm not really going to focus on any specific product, but I'll try to put as much information as can as far as into the thought process is why I ranked it in this order, which is the display, internet, controller, and audio. Basically try to inform you guys as much as I possibly can, because this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and I really want to try to inform you guys as much as I can so that you guys are better equipped to understand the science and the in-depth knowledge that there is when it comes to peripherals, because there is a lot of knowledge at play in choosing peripherals. And also in the comment section, if you enjoy this video, if you liked it, disliked it, or had some suggestions to improve it, or things that you disagree with or agree with, let me know in the comments, please. It definitely helps me out, and I enjoy reading them from you guys. As well as if this video is informative and you find it useful, please share it with your friends, because it not only helps them out, it helps me out to give me greater exposure. That is something that every YouTuber seeks. But anyways, with all that out of the way, now all the products that I would recommend you look at in those 4 categories, I'll have in the description of the video with Amazon affiliate links. They help me out and they don't cost you anything. So if you are looking at improving or upgrading your monitor or things like that, definitely check out the ones that I would recommend. I did all the research for you guys, so you guys don't really have to put much thought into it, but you can go back and kind of look up reviews if you so desire. But anyways, in this video, that is what I basically want to attack and what I want to focus with. And I might, misspeak at times. I might mess up and stumble like I just did. I'm just going to keep rolling with it. So hopefully you guys don't find that too distracting, and we're just going to keep going in the video. All right. So anyways, monitors, displays, your TV, what you choose to game on, how you choose to see the game is very, very important. And that is my number 1 thing when it comes to gaming, when it comes to first-person competitive shooters, when it comes to fighting games as well as racing games. What you see, how you see the game is really kind of determined on how well you're going to do. And the reason behind that is because every modern television and display, like every modern display out there, whether it be a TV or monitor, they will have a certain level of input latency. Display lag is also what it's called. And what that is how long it takes it to receive the signal from your console and display the image for you to be able to visually react to what's going on. And if that is a really high amount, what basically is happening on your console, you'll be delayed and you won't be able to react to it properly, and that could lose you to a lot of gunfights. You won't be able to keep combos when it comes to fighting games, as well as you're not going to be able to make turns in simple racing games, especially in any sort of simulated racer. When you're trying to make a turn, if you always overshoot it or overturn, it could be the fact that your monitor is not giving you the information you need fast enough for you to properly react. So that is why this is very, very important, why displays are very important, because if you have a display with a high input latency, it could be detrimental to you doing well. And how do you find input latency? Because none of the manufacturers will advertise it. This is basically like a taboo topic. And don't mistake this with response time. Input latency and response time are 2 separate things that both kind of help you game, but they kind of affect it differently. Whereas input latency, how long it takes to process and be shown, whereas response time is how long those little pixels on the screen take to change color, okay? Now, they are completely different. And this input latency is something that's not very advertised. In my opinion, as far as why it's not advertised, is because every modern display has a certain level of input latency. They just can't get around it due to the limitations of the technology. You have to think of your monitor or your TV as a computer that takes a signal, ones and zeros, and basically transfers that into an image that you can see on the screen. And depending on what that monitor or just TV is trying to do, it could affect the transfer time or how long it takes to encode that to be displayed. So if you have a really fancy TV with a lot of fancy features, that processing time could be extended, and that's why you might have a high input latency. And that's why a lot of modern TVs, a lot of modern quality TVs have a feature called game mode, which it basically strips that processing just to give you the raw image. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to still be the best image, because the internals of the TV as well as the type of display the TV has all affect the input latency, as some are definitely better than others when it comes to input latency. And if you are curious as to find what TVs are good for input latency, there are some websites out there that have done tests to try to show the consumers which ones you need to focus on, but they're not all inclusive. They don't have the resources to test everything out there, but they definitely tried their best to keep up with the modern, I guess, production line of all the major companies to try to make sure that you guys are still well informed and that you could choose these in order to make sure that you're getting the best gaming performance. And the two sites that I would recommend are displaylag.com as well as tftcentral.co.uk. Those are the two sites. Now, the TFT Central is more so with monitors, where displaylag.com is both monitors and actual TVs, which is, I think, really, really cool. And it is my go-to site when I'm trying to look at things to recommend, like the monitors that I have in the description below. And when it comes to display, like the display lag is measured in milliseconds. And when you're trying to think of like what you need to be concerned with when it comes to milliseconds, I feel that the lower the number, the better, but to what degree? Now, when it comes to a frame at 60 frames per second, there's a number associated with that, which is 16.67 milliseconds. That's how long it takes for one frame at 60 frames per second to be refreshed. So if you have a monitor that is able to produce a input latency less than 16.67, that is perfectly fine. That means it has one frame of lag. But if it's at, let's say, 16.68 seconds, that means it's going to go over to the next frame, and then that will have about 2 frames of latency. So that is something to be very concerned with. And how I got that number is basically you just take 1 divided by 60, because that's 1 second divided by 60 frames. And then you get the number of 0.006 something blah. And then you multiply that by 1000. That converts it into milliseconds. And that's how you get the 16.67 milliseconds is the length of one frame at 60 frames per second. And also, why is 60 frames per second an important number? That's because the HDMI cable, which is what your console is limited to, which is the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Wii U, which are the current consoles out, they are limited to 60 frames per second because the HDMI cable is physically limited to 60 frames per second. So getting a monitor that is 144 hertz or having a TV that is said to have 120 or 240 hertz as far as a refresh rate, those aren't necessarily true because the cable itself is limited to 60. Now, when it comes to a monitor, if it's 144 hertz, most likely it has a dual link DVI or display port to basically allow for that high of a refresh rate, because those are able to produce that high of a refresh rate where the HDMI cable is physically unable to produce that. And when it comes to TVs that only have HDMI inputs, they can't produce a true signal above 60 hertz. And what they do is they basically take the 60 hertz signal and then processes the image to make up frames in between to give you that smoother picture, which looks really nice, but it adds to that input latency, and it kind of will continue to deteriorate your gaming performance because of the greater input latency. And that's all there is to know about input latency. And like I said, you can't find that on any manufacturer's websites, but like the two resources I said, they will be able to tell you, and that's how you kind of shop for monitors. And if you have a TV that has a high input latency, going down to something that's a lower input latency will greatly improve your performance. Going down from, let's say you have like if you're able to reduce your input latency by 3 frames or even 2 frames, but mainly 3 frames or above, will greatly improve your performance. I know from firsthand, when I went from my large screen TV to my monitor, my performance like drastically improved, where I was able to get on top of the leaderboards, whereas with my old Samsung, I wasn't able to really maintain at the top of the leaderboards because I just wasn't able to see things as they were appearing because of the input lag. So enough of that. Input latency, very important when it comes to monitors. But then as far as other things when it comes to monitors, when it comes to console gaming, you don't need anything higher than 1080p, because let's say you have a 4K TV that has upscaling. You don't want it to upscale anything because that is going to increase input latency. And the consoles are limited to 1080p. I mean, they could probably play movies at 4K. I'm pretty sure the PlayStation 4 can. I think the Xbox One are able to. But when it comes to when it comes to rendering games, they aren't able to even put out 1080p, or it's very rare that they're able to put out 1080p. Most of them put out like 900p or something lower like that. And so then to upscale that image to a 4K image, it might look a little better, but it's not really going to be that huge of an improvement. So when it comes to a TV, I would recommend just 1080p, 60 frames per second. And then as far as response time, what do you want to look at response time? I think anything below 5 milliseconds is pertinent for response time. And what that will affect is how well you're able to play fast-paced games without having ghosting. And what ghosting is basically like blurred images. If you have someone moving across the screen at high speed, it could have like basically a trail behind it, because if it has a high response time, it will affect how long those pixels are able to change color and transfer, where you're not going to be able to kind of see things. Things will be a little bit blurred. So having a low response time is also important, especially in like fast-paced Twitch-based games. But I think anything below 5 is good, and anything below 3 is competition grade. You don't necessarily need to go with 1 millisecond, because most of those numbers are also like kind of made up numbers by the manufacturers, where they are called gray to gray, like a certain shade of gray to a certain shade of gray is response time, and like depending on what shade will kind of affect their numbers. So they're not all truly accurate, but if you have something that is advertised to be less than 5, it should be good. Less than 3, competition is what I would recommend. So 2 milliseconds is perfectly fine. You don't need to splurge the extra money just to get the 1 millisecond, but it is nice. And some monitors are nicer as far as for ghosting than others, even though they have the same response time. But that's what I would look at for monitors, is that, or for displays. Like, those are the things that I look at and why they're important, because if you take a long time to see something, then you're not able to react on it. And reaction is the most important thing when it comes to gaming, is your ability to react on something. And if you don't have the information presented to you immediately, then you're going to suffer. So that's displays. And as far as like the size of the TV, it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, 24 inches or a 50-inch TV, it depends on how far away you sit from it. So if you're at a desk and it's like right here, 24 inches is big enough. And also that will be a lot cheaper than trying to find a big 50-inch TV that has the same input latency. That's going to be a lot more expensive as well. But if you just want to sit in the living room environment, then it is possible. But I would just stick with like a 24-inch TV or 24-inch monitor, having it right at a desk, and it's perfect for the competitive players out there. So once again, that's displays. I'm done with it. Now let's move on to the internet. And this is also going to be something a little bit touchy, because everyone isn't going to have access to the best connection possible. It's really limited on your local internet service provider, as well as your physical location. I remember when I lived in Hawaii, trying to play Call of Duty, connecting to all the servers in California, or to the people in California, I suffered from a lot of lag compensation. And lag compensation is there to try to help people who live farther out, and kind of hinders the performance of the people who live really close to the servers. But still, living close to the servers is more beneficial than the people living far out, because ping really matters. And having a low ping is ideal compared to a high ping. And that's all having to do with, like I said, your local internet service provider. So, you don't necessarily need to have the best internet possible. You don't need to buy the most extreme package, because that's not going to help you at all. You could do perfectly fine with like a 10 megabits per second download, 1 megabits per second upload. That's perfectly fine for gaming. But your ping is going to be all due to your physical location away from the servers. So that can't really be helped, but there are certain things you could do to try to maximize what you have to work with. And when it comes to internet connection and having my stuff connected, I like doing wires. Wires everything, because a wire connection is a lot more stable, and it is faster than a wireless setup, especially if you live in an apartment complex of a major city. You could have a lot of interferences at different frequencies affecting your signal, which will introduce lag, which will kind of cause you to, lose connection, regain connection, and that will really affect your gaming, and as well as anything else like streaming movies. So I personally prefer to run a wire. Like, I have a 50-foot cable going from my computer all the way to the living room, to the router box, to the switch, connected to a switch here, because that's how much I believe in wired. But if you don't necessarily have that ability, there are other products out there that can help you keep a wired connection. Like there's adapters that will plug into the wall and the internet signal will travel through basically the power circuitry of your house. Those products are available out there that will offer a more stable connection than a wireless signal, as well as there's other products that will do the same thing over coax cables. Let's say if you have like a house with multiple cable outlets, you can use something like that to try to run it from the living room to your personal room or to your game room, whichever you have, to try to maintain that wired connection. So that's another option, but I believe that the wired connection is best. And also because the Wi-Fi capabilities of the PlayStation 4 specifically, it basically sucks. It does suck, all right? Don't try to argue that it doesn't. If you live in a suburban area in a house that doesn't have a whole lot of interferences, then you might not be affected by it as much. But still, regardless, a wired connection is always going to be better, and it's always going to be a lot more stable as well. So that's another thing that you want to do. Now, this solution can be very cheap. I mean, Ethernet cable runs really cheap from sites like Monoprice. But to get the adapters can be decently expensive, but you can still find them for less than $50 for the power line adapters, as well as less than $100 for the coax cable adapters, if that is something that you really want, or that's something that you need and you can't run the cable all the way to the router in your living room or wherever you have it stationed at your house. So that's everything to do with internet. And as well as like when it comes to the consoles, like there's going to be a feature in the consoles that you can test the internet connection. You can basically have the console test the connection and make sure that it is good. And if it is not good, it'll give you an error. Then you could go Google it to see what you can do to try to improve that connection. But as long as you also have a good connection from the console saying that it's good, then you should also be fine. And those are the things that I would recommend you do when it comes to the internet. Now, when it comes to fancy routers and fancy things like that, there's some things that do help. So let's say those fancy like Asus gaming routers, or those routers that have like all those multiple antennas coming out of it. Those are nice, but the limitations of the consoles to receive that signal is what's really going to hinder your performance. Like the PlayStation 4 specifically, the Wi-Fi card isn't that great. So if you spend all this money on an actual router, this like amazing wireless router that, you know, your PlayStation 4 can't utilize, then it's going to be a waste of money. But having a wired connection is just going to be ideal. Even on a cheap router, is going to be better than a wireless connection, just because of the PlayStation 4's limitations. And when it comes to things like a NetDuma R1 gaming router, so a NetDuma R1 is one of these really cool devices that I believe in. It is a router that is able to allow you to control who you connect with. So if you have a really good connection and you don't want to connect to laggy people, you could basically tell your router to exclude connecting to anyone within your set parameters. So you can set what type of ping you want them to have, where they're physically located from you, and that will just greatly affect your gameplay. And I did a test in a video a while back where I tested out Super Smash Brothers on the Wii U, which is a game that is notorious for lag, which has a lot of laggy online games. And I showed that like when I don't use it, I just get teamed up with a bunch of laggy people. But when I do use it and have things set in, I actually have like really stable, solid games that are actually able to play without having to like freeze frame every few moments. So it is a product that I do believe in that could greatly help you, especially if you are a person who has really great internet at a really great location. So that's basically all the things I would recommend. So first is just wireless, or like go with a wire connection above all else. And then if you have that settled, you want better performance, then possibly get a NetDuma gaming router, but that is kind of decently expensive. But the proprietary software that it has is ideal for console gamers. Doesn't really help so much with a PC, but it is very awesome for console gaming. It'll make sure that you always have a great connection to the games that you want to play with the people that you want to play with, so you can make sure that you don't have any of those laggy people that are going to mess up your game. So that's it for the internet. Now, controllers. When it comes to the controller, there's a lot of products, a lot of things to do with controllers, and a lot of it I think is kind of nonsense to a certain degree. Now, the most important thing I would say when it comes to a controller as far as what you want is you want to have a wired connection. Now, wireless technology has come a long way over the years. From when things first came out, they have like greatly improved. And even the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 are better than the wireless Xbox 360 controller, because the 360 had a decent amount of lag. I think it was about 8 milliseconds of input latency. Whereas PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and the new Xbox One are like a lot less now, so it's not as noticeable. But still, it's better to have a wired connection, because even if it's like 4 milliseconds of input latency, that could be 4 milliseconds that you pull a trigger compared to someone else, and then they will win the gunfight because you weren't able to press it in time for your console to receive the signal and send information. Basically, just latency is the main killer when it comes to gaming. So I feel it is kind of beneficial if you really want the best performance when it comes to a controller, is make sure it's a wired controller, or just plug it in wired, like through the wire when it comes to the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, because then it will act as a wired controller. Now, when we're talking about other peripherals, the main thing with controllers is you just want to be able to control your character accurately with precision and aim on the other person and react as fast as you can. So that's why the wire is very important. But then when it comes to little peripherals and little add-ons to the controller, like let's say control freaks, which are these little things that you add on to the analog stick that allows you to have greater sensitivity with more control. I feel that those things are beneficial if you're someone who can't control a very high sensitivity. So when it comes to a first-person shooter game, if you are playing the game and you're not able to control a very high sensitivity, because when you move the analog stick, your aim just goes everywhere and you're not able to kind of fine-tune it, then a control freak would be beneficial. But if you're one of those people that can take the stock analog stick and control it with max sensitivity, then, kudos to you. You don't necessarily need a control freak. It won't really help you as long as you're able to stay, as long as you're still able to aim accurately. That's the most important thing, is how fast you're able to turn on someone and how accurate you are to stay on them is the important thing. So that's what the control freaks help out with. But that's only if you can't do it with the sticks alone, which I can't. I use a control freak whenever I use a console or a controller. It's something that I do believe in, and also it's like something fairly cheap. Now, the next category when it comes to controllers is scuff controllers, the fancy controllers that have the multiple buttons in the back. And the thought process behind it is you will never lose the ability to aim when you need to like run, jump, knife, stab, or do whatever you need to do in the game. You will always have your thumb on the analog stick, like able to aim on the opponents. And that's something kind of true with like games that have you wall running and stuff like that. It is always beneficial to be able to keep the aim on, because like if you don't have the scuff and if you don't play claw, which is something that really hurts the hand if you play it for extended amounts of time, you will have to take your thumb off of the thumbstick in order to hit the A button or whatever button you use to jump, and then go back to the thumbstick. And let's say if you go to jump and someone's right there, well, then it's going to take time for you to put your thumb back on the thumbstick and aim on them, where they could already have the advantage of aiming at you, and then you probably lose that gunfight just because of that split second. But it's not necessarily important when it comes to gaming. It's not the most important thing to make sure you have, because, it's just like a little add-on when it comes to the thumbs. It's not like you're always going to be jumping constantly where you always lose the ability to aim. It's only like for those specific moments, and paying $200+ for a fancy scuff controller, I'm not too sure if it's really justifiable just for that. I feel that the input latency of your TV as well as like the internet connection you have are more important upgrades than the scuff alone. So, but if you already have those things and you want a more, like if you want to, like try to maximize your potential, then a scuff could be beneficial to you just for those attributes. But then like if you don't necessarily want to go with a scuff, like let's say you want to use a mouse and keyboard on a console, that is possible now. The product that I would recommend is called a Zim 4. It's a product that I use now. There is a drawback with the Zim 4 is that it adds latency. I think it adds like 5 milliseconds of latency, which is very small, very negligible, but still it adds a little bit of latency. So if you want the best performance when it comes to games, you need to use a controller that is wired. But if, sacrificing a little bit of that latency for better control when it comes to a mouse and keyboard, then that is an option that you could do. And I personally like it. I love the feel of controlling my aim with a mouse over an analog stick. I feel I'm a lot more accurate with the mouse, but when it comes to console games, there's like certain level of aim assist that help you. So it's not necessary, but is another option out there if you guys are trying to maximize your potential. I believe in a Zim 4 over a scuff controller, but if you want the best performance, having a wired scuff is probably the best way to go when it comes to competitive first-person shooters. And then lastly, let's talk about audio, all right? So audio is another realm that people claim that will greatly improve their gaming, but it depends on what type of gaming you do. So if you are playing a fighting game or a racing game, it doesn't really help you that much. You could just be fine with stereo sound. At least that's my opinion on it. But when it comes to shooters, having a surround sound setup or a really nice quality headphones with an open soundstage could greatly benefit you depending on how well you're able to hear things. This is all going to be based on you, because if your hearing isn't that good, then having a really nice set of headphones isn't really going to help you very much at these games. And when it comes to consoles are kind of limited to how you receive sound. And if you want to receive a surround sound experience, you need to invest in some sort of a gaming headset and some sort of a device that will take the signal from the Xbox and convert it to a Dolby Digital surround sound so that you could have positional awareness. And in some games, it is really beneficial to have positional awareness and what type of playstyle you play as. Like in Call of Duty, having awareness and dead silence are really great things to have, because then you have positional cues if you have a really nice set of headphones to be able to hear enemies and where they're coming at you. And it kind of gives you the advantage over other players. It still doesn't equal the benefit of having a really nice, like, low input latency monitor and some quality internet. And still, it won't like affect you that much if your controller, like, for some reason, if your controller sucks. But I feel it is the very last thing you need to look at when you're trying to upgrade your gaming. But it can benefit you depending on what type of gaming and game style that you play. So if you're a more cautious player that likes listening to audio cues, then it will greatly help you. But if you're someone who just likes to run a gun and run around like an idiot and you don't have dead silence on, then it's not necessarily going to be that big of a benefit to you. It might help you just to kind of hear positional cues, to hear like gunfire like far off. But to really sound whore, you need to kind of adjust your game style to do this. But if that's something you're willing to do, then I think audio is a great setup. So you really want to focus on a surround sound setup. Now, when it comes to 5.1 versus 7.1, that doesn't really matter too much, in my opinion. I don't think it really makes that big of a deal, because it's not like you're actually getting any extra physical speakers around you. All you're doing is you're changing like how well it's able to better represent to your ears. And I think that mainly is just like a marketing ploy to kind of advertise that you have 7.1 over a 5.1 setup, because you have to think of the limitations of the headphones, where they're just two stereo headphones right in your ears. And what they're doing is they're altering the sound frequency to kind of make you think that they are going in different directions. So I don't think that's huge improvement, or I don't think the 7.1 versus 5.1 is that big of a deal. But having surround sound over stereo is a great benefit for sound whoring and to basically have positional cues. And when it comes to the quality of the audio, if you want something that is like, kind of a standard now as far as like giving you a good sound, I think Astro mix amps are probably the best way to go when it comes to console gaming, just because they're relatively cheap for what they do. I mean, they're not necessarily cheap, but they're the kind of on the cheaper side as far as like audio quality, where if you really want to get, a high-end device, you get something like a Creative X7, which I feel is pretty awesome. But I think the Astro Mix Amp is a little bit better just for the price to performance that you'll get. And then when it comes to headphones, I don't believe in any like headsets. I don't think you should go out and get like the actual headsets that come with Astro, or any headsets for that matter, because usually headsets are a subpar like headphone with a mic attached, and because it has that gaming aesthetic, they jack up the price a decent amount. So it is not necessarily needed for your gaming performance or for your gaming needs. I think just a really nice quality headphone with like a little clip-on mic is more than enough for anyone out there just to be able to game, and really that will give you a superior performance. And when it comes to headsets, I would recommend wired once again, just because a wired connection will give you a better sound quality than wireless. But if you need wireless, I mean, you can go with some products, and just a regular Astro 850 is probably the setup that I would recommend when it comes to wireless. But when it comes to wired, there are some headphones that I think are superior in every way. And that's like the findings from like Audio-Technica. And Audio-Technica ATH AD700X is by far the best headphone for sound whoring when it comes to price and performance. Absolutely the best headphones that you could possibly get to sound whore, because they have a really low bass. They have hardly any bass response, so your ears aren't going to get drowned out when it comes to explosions and stuff, so that you can still focus on audio cues and the footsteps, so that you're not going to get fatigued and you can still kind of play at your maximum potential. So I mean, like, if sound whoring is really big, those are the headphones I would recommend. And then when it comes to just overall sound quality, if you just want like a great immersive headphones that have great soundstage and, you know, great sound response, these are going to be a little bit spendy. But my favorite are the Philips Fidelio X2s. These are still open back. They have great soundstage, like I said, but they have more of a bass response and everything just sounds crisper with them. And they also have a low impedance, so it doesn't take very much to drive them as well as the Audio-Technicas. It doesn't take much to drive them, so a Astro mix amp would be perfect to power them, and you won't be hindered by any sort of performance because they are low impedance headphones. So it is just the perfect setup for gaming, in my opinion. Then just like a little clip-on mic, you don't need anything expensive. You don't need to get a Antlion mod mic, because those are kind of pricey as well for what they are. They're just a little lavalier mic that's like attached to a little stick. You just get a cheap lavalier mic, hook it onto the cord, and then you're perfectly set up for gaming and talking to your friends. So that is basically my recommendations when it comes to console gaming and things that you want to look at to try to improve your console gaming. So I do apologize once again. This was a good lengthy amount, and if you guys are still here, definitely let me know, because I want to know if people are actually staying the full length of the video to actually watch it. If not, then I might try to cut things out in future videos, try to make them short and concise. But I like doing these long, detailed talks with you guys to try to make sure that you're as well informed as I am when it comes to these products, so that we can all be better when it comes to gaming. And that's my biggest emphasis, is try to improve your guys' gaming performance by teaching you guys things that I know that help me out considerably to get decent gameplays here for my YouTube channel. So anyways, that's it for the video. Thank you guys very much for watching. I do greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys again in the next one, all right? Bye-bye.